Okay, a couple of changes. I'm now including a little minimum maximum Kelvin values for this display, and they're just from the last render, and then I use them in the next render to set the range of the color. So hopefully it won't just saturate all white quite as easily. And then, so I am burning the water, so I track how much water is remaining now in this thing called H2O. So I started off with 3,000 moles, down to 1,000. We've boiled off about 400 clouds. The average cloud has 5 moles in it. So we have 2,000. We have 2.2 moles, 2,000 moles rather, in the air. Oh, we're drying up. 600 moles left. And well, the sun has been going across the equator here. The only water is in this section here. So it's been generating short streams of particles, cloudlets, while it goes across. And as they go up in the air, they get caught in either the north hemisphere or south hemisphere rolling cylinders. And that creates this sort of DNA lattice helix. Get kind of looking down the cylinder. I don't know if you can see that. And then as they go along, so like right now we've used up all the water, so it's not making any more clouds, so we've got 504 cloudlets. But that number goes down because when similar cloudlets hang around together, they eventually merge into a single cloudlet that's a little bigger. It's like this one's a little bigger. It's, several. So the average is 6 moles. They're born with 1 mole each. So each on average has merged with 5 others, but that's on average. So some have merged with more, like this guy. And some have merged with fewer. Anyway, so this is the rolling barrel stuff. I'm going to do something similar for these hurricane zones, which will be more vertical circles. And I'm going to set that up as an array of n hurricane circles, where each hurricane circle is given a center point, which I'm going to use a virtual scale of 0, 0, 0 in the center, and then 1 on either, plus 1, minus 1, plus 1, minus 1. And then that'll be the numbers that Lua will send down when it wants to place a new hurricane zone. So when a map loads, one of the things Lua can do is it can say, set hurricane zone 0 to these values. Set hurricane zone 1 to these values. Set hurricane zone 2 to these values. I will otherwise probably just set them to the 4 quadrants, one in the center of each one. Or maybe I'll do something a little bit random. Ideally, they should track with the terrain, right? So ideally, a map designer would find a random seed that they liked that generated the terrain that they liked, and then place the hurricane zones where they think they're nice. And you also provide some sort of a intensity. But even that, the hurricane zones themselves interact, I hope, so they can spin each other up and down as they hit each other head on and not. And what I really want to do is in a context where 2 large hurricane zones rub against each other, going the wrong direction. They're not going together. They're going opposite. Then what I want them to do is I want them to push apart a little bit and then create a small hurricane zone in the middle, which then spins the direction that glues them together. So now they are slightly smaller in radius, new circle that's small is here. And as they go by, they are so big and massive that even though they're moving kind of slowly, they spin this guy up. It's like a gear reduction kind of thing. He's a tiny gear, and they're huge gears, and so as they turn, he spins really fast. But as he spins really fast, he gets, I guess he gets a lot of suction and pulls up more water. So he gets heavy. So he's a fast spinning, heavy thing full of water, and that makes him swell out, and that makes him get bigger. And somewhere along that, he gets some inertia headed in a direction. Well, he's in one of the prevailing winds, so he's probably mostly in this circle, if we think of the circles in question of having been North Hemisphere and South Hemisphere. And we're thinking of a hurricane getting formed by the abrasion between them, and then follows this parent up to Florida. Anyway, and then eventually I'll worry about them not all just being in a line, so that this mass looks more like a mass of clouds, and I'll worry about having them roll off the one edge and onto the other if I have a wrapped map, and then maybe some experiments flying through them. But if I were down on the ground on my character, so here's a little character, I'm having an on the ground character experience. I look up in the sky. Well, I'm underwater, so I'm seeing the clouds through the water. But that's what the clouds look like. Oh, also imagine that I've sped them up, right? So this is what time lapse of the clouds would look like. Those barrels, I think that was genius. That's pretty fun. Look at the direction. That's not entirely uncloudy. Here, let's get out of the water. But if the camera is above the sea level, above the ocean line, I no longer draw the terrain triangles that are under the ocean. That is to say, there's a sea level and there's a sea bottom. And if they're at sea bottom, I don't render them. And so that ends up cutting out about half the triangles. All this dark blue here is terrain that I did not render. I guess that's another thing. It's like these clouds were created over this body of water, and nothing yet is really moving them far from that. Right now, too much of their thermodynamic property of going up and down is coming from this rotation. And I probably need to make sure that that's more thermodynamic. And also, I don't know, these mountains are pretty high up, so these clouds are going up probably higher than real world clouds would go. So just having these cylinders could be sort of flattened like little treadmills. Although it's kind of cool. I mean, so far I haven't had to even use a sine function or and I effectively don't use any square roots, but I know secretly I use a lot of square roots. But I'm enjoying that. And I'm still evolving into this concept of I will have a budget of a certain number of triangles to render the world, this map, this planet. And oh, by the way, I'm thinking it is actually pretty easy to stick one more little matrix transform in one little spot so as to wrap this world over a sphere so that it looks round. And then as you fly over the map, it completes the sphere, so that it should be possible to have it look like a map sphere with clouds and everything, all just mapped, because they're all going through the same camera functions anyway. So it's just a little special mode of the camera to say, nope, the world is being rendered spherical, which only works when you're above a certain altitude or something. And then as you zoom in, as the sphere fills the screen, then without you really noticing it, it flattens out. And then I dispense with that extra transform, and then you're just in a flat world like you are now as you're flying over the surface. So, down here, it just still looks like this. It looks flat. But it tiles, so there's always new. Well, the stuff that you passed a while ago appears on the horizon. So here it's growing some crops underwater, so clearly there's an opportunity there to have the crops vary with... Also, there could be spontaneously emitted crops. Also, there could be spores, but the spores could be assumed to panspermia, to reach everywhere. So I could have spontaneous vegetation, is what I'm saying. And it could be spontaneous in the sense of probably not, wheat doesn't want to grow underwater, but some seagrass does. So I don't know, this might be kind of Minecrafty, but simplified in the sense it's triangles instead of cubes. And you don't really break the land up. You just kind of walk around on the surface and collect things you find there. And then, game number 47 is you then craft other things out of those things until you finally make the thing you really needed, which is a home for your critter and a cannon. And a cannon that can shoot your critter across the continent. An intercontinental critter missile. An intercontinental ballistic critter. Then game number 49, you can play Hatfields and McCoys. Ballistically launching critters attacking from my island to your island, trying to destroy your still while protecting my own. But we need a frame rate. We need to get our frame rate back up to 30. So that was the real reason I made the change about the not rendering the terrain when it's under the ocean. The other thing about that is, at first I did it as soon as it dropped below sea level, but then the fact that the terrain triangles really don't have the resolution to be a good match to the land triangles, it felt better to continue rendering the land even as it was a little bit into the water, so that you kind of got the illusion of a slope of the land going down below the sea. So the shallow waters, you can still see the land below, but the deep waters you can't, until you get close enough to sea level, at which point, and I guess I got to do that a little quicker. Like, it's basically, when does this blue disappear? When I get to the point where I no longer have a blue, like right here, I should probably be rendering down below again. So I could just estimate that, say, 8 meters. But also when I'm down here, and now I'm officially underwater, there should be some sort of light filter. I mean, this should all have a blue cast. You know, I wonder, maybe, yeah, you know, that's what it is, isn't it? I need to just cover the entire screen. Yeah, thank you, like that. Well, no, not just like that. I need to literally do a two-dimensional wipe of this kind of blue over the entire screen after rendering everything. Well, not over the display panels. Just to give it that underwatery kind of feel. But seeing these things floating on the roof of sea level, that's kind of fun. Oh, I see, I can't get down there. Okay, now the other thing I like, well, we're just talking about things I like. Okay, appreciate these clouds. By the way, we had 500 clouds before, now we're down to 326 with an average of 8 moles per cloud. Which only accounts for 2.59 thousand moles, 2,500 moles. So 500 moles have gone missing. They're not in the clouds, and they're not in the ocean. And that's not supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen is if the cloud precipitates or otherwise drops its rain, if the cloud ceases to exist, or if, like when it gets pooled together with another cloudlet. I wondered, is there any chance I did that wrong? Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to switch to a I kind of like this, the green wireframe with the transparent blue water. I think that looks, it's like, I accept that this is a low resolution, old-fashioned graphical display. But because of these nice equilateral triangles and their nice little color changes, it somehow feels better, feels more interesting. And it's certainly, here it's fairly informative because you see the shallow water land. So you see there's like a land bridge here. So if this was now an ocean game number 57, if I was sailing boats on the water, I might have to worry about the depth of their keel. If I had a submarine, my submarine might get more visible in this area where it tries to get from there to there. But there is still water, so when the sun goes overhead, it will boil off some clouds there. And if I implement the actual water line lowering as the water runs out, then this could be a bridge, a land bridge that appears only after you've vaporized, a lot of water. And then, of course, it's all a land bridge once you've vaporized all the water. Anyway, so I think I'll do that. Now, then it will expose more of the... well, actually, it'll probably all kind of appear at once, come to think of it. So I'll lose my performance boost from that. Okay, it's getting about hot enough. Let's see, 229 degrees. I think we're going to see some clouds boiling pretty soon. I didn't really pay attention as to where north-south was. But I like that, shallow water, deep water. Now, when I make the ocean level itself go up and down, at the same time, I can do that all the time slowly to give a, very slow kind of the whole ocean is going up and down kind of feeling. That should be cool. I could have tides kind of. I could have the ocean just kind of slosh back and forth between two extremes. And I could even get radical about that. I mean, just nothing saying I have to put the triangles at sea level. I mean, I could have a disturbance that created a huge depression, and then the water could fill back in and make a huge bump. And then that bump could, within the resolution of these equilateral triangles, but I could have a wave Gee, I guess I could have a tsunami. Okay, so now we see some heat activity. So it looks like here's where the sun is. So the sun is traveling west to east, which I still need to reverse if I want to be more Earth-like. I mean, this means that the planet is rotating like this. Okay, now we're over dirt now, so it should stop putting off water. I see the shallow water gave us clouds, but the dirt now. So the sun is moving along. And that was our first wisp of clouds. Maybe our second. Okay, so here comes our third, and it starts off as a single stream because the sun's just going a straight line. But as they go up, chaotic uncertainty causes them to veer a little to the left or the right, a little to the north or the south, and then they get captured by the large hemispherical polar toroids, simulated here as giant rolling cylinders, which then peel them off, and then thereafter they are these nice stripes painted on the inside of a cylinder, and as the cylinder rotates, it picks up additional stripes until the ocean runs out of water. And as the temperatures go up, the number of cloudlets per second increase, number of moles per minute increase. But what you see is more and more and more clouds getting boiled off. And this is really hot water now. And as such, it's using up the water in the ocean really fast. Wow, that's a lot of water. I thought I had it set to 3,000 max. Maybe I changed that. Anyway, the use of the hurricane circles, since they're set by the star map and since everybody has a synchronized clock, there's a good chance that the winds in particular will be synchronized for all the players. So game number 72 is a sailboat simulation. And I love it when the clouds get forced down to sea level. And they just get pushed to sea level, but they otherwise keep following the cylinder. And then eventually they get lifted back up. Which again is accurate in a sort of a big picture climate sense, I think. Well, for small measurements of accurate. But it's definitely just a game climate. It's not. But anyway, again, so I'm going to have this total budget of triangles, and I just need to pick the very best triangles to spend that budget on. So I think that the reduction of the terrain triangles from lots of itty-bitty ones to a handful of larger ones is a good trade-off, and it gave with it the benefit of this shallow water visualization, which actually adds a lot, I think, for if I was making a strategy game. I'd understand a lot more about the terrain here. And there may be things like, highly shallow, lots of shallow land area. Maybe that's where you have to build your ports. I don't see letting the water level go up and down a lot is going to be popular. But of course, it's politically interesting as well. And, if I can have that all under control of the star map, then you can get a game number 79. You can get a distress call from this planet saying we've mismanaged our atmosphere, we need, we need some terraforming. So we would come in and we'd dump a bunch of carbon in the air, the high atmosphere. It would take, 5 years to sink all the way back down to the ground and eventually into the ocean. But it would just darken the total amount of solar input to the planet and start a little ice age. I wonder how many tons of carbony powder you would need to do that. Of course, you'd have to also stop doing what you were doing that broke it in the first place. Doing one without the other wouldn't really be much fun. So I like the way the stuff moves across the ground. I don't like it going up 60 billion feet. What I want is I want this barrel to deliver the clouds to another layer that moves them horizontally at a level where I want to see them. And then thermodynamics moves them up and down across those layer boundaries. And so when they go above or below that horizontal layer, like the hurricane layer is a vertically thin layer. It doesn't reach all the way up to the top of the atmosphere. I have to look at some pictures of hurricanes, see how true that seems. Anyway, sorry I'm so long-winded and boring, and easily pleased, easily amused. So the frame rate's still not game worthy. 7 frames per second with 542 clouds. Now I want to have only like 100 clouds and depend on them growing larger. The 100 best clouds. And there again, I can have 1,000 clouds, but then only render the 100 best ones. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that the computer can do really fast, and going through lists of like 1,000 things that you're just incrementing a number, that's not too bad. But each of these triangles, it has to read because they're transparent, it isn't just blitting the triangle to the screen, it has to read the back information so it can merge it together. And then when you have to talk to the graphical stuff, you quite often have to wait for access to it because the display is using it at the time. And lots of other things, which is why it's silly of me to be doing this with the Canvas environment. But whoever at Google did the Draw Vertices implementation in Canvas, well, I guess I don't know that it isn't a public source thing. Well, let me just say thank you to them, whoever they were. And if it was you, Fred, thanks, Fred. You're always the best. Okay. Well, I have to document these things because I go past them and then I don't come back. It's like we won't probably see this display forever, so I've wasted a gigabyte holding on to it. I don't know. I mean, I might just leave it open all the time, but it's a debug thing. It's something, and it's not even just a debug thing. It's an editor thing. This is our interface for editing the world. So let's just generate some different fractals and see what they look like. Okay. All right. So yeah, I can see this being a fun map, again, for a game a Command and Conquer, a real-time strategy game, which included sea units. Not really a fun underwater game. It's kind of flat. By the way, you know, you don't have to have the ocean, right? So one thing that the Lua configuration of the planet should be is whether or not there is an ocean. And if you wanted to just play a battle zone, a tank battle game, a wireframe tank battle game, well, there you go. Game number 89. Okay, so let's, okay, so here, this planet would probably never get any clouds, because there is no, okay, it's got a little bit of water in the corner here. So if the dirt here gets so hot, if the stripe in the middle gets so hot, and that hot bleeds out all the way to the poles, to the point where the poles get hot enough, then those poles could generate some cloud. That'd take a long time. Sometime I'll run it overnight and see what that's like. Okay, so here's one that's mostly land. So for this sort of thing, what I think as an editor, what I'd want to have, and so it's probably a button up here, probably a single button for like fun stuff you can do, and then a menu pops open with the scrolling list of individual fun things. But what I'm thinking of is I definitely do need to add the ability to pick, to tap on terrain and have it select the terrain I tapped on. Select the location there, and then I'd like to be able to flatten, basically just sort of say, oh, maybe you go to an aerial view, select the flatten tool, and then touch my finger where I want it to be flat and push my finger around to sort of set a radius, and then lift up, and then it's done. And now it's flattened. And all it's really done is it's written down at X and Y, I flattened a radius of R to this altitude. That's information that is stored in the star map. So the moderator doesn't have to share that with people. That's the star map itself has the planet. Now there may also be star maps that generate a random planet for you on demand, and I think I would do that for sure. Basically, given a single random seed, I would drive a set of other random seeds to then initialize the terrain and the climate and the whatever. So that maybe there's only one planet visible or a couple of planets visible at the star map grid level. But when you're flying around and you say, oh, I'm going to go in and investigate this planet, you go down into it and that generates a whole new, virtual world, which is either completely random or from one of n random seeds that this map designer has decided he wants to have. Like he's developed a total of 6 planets, but only one of them at a time is mounted, as it were, and it only gets mounted when you dive into its atmosphere, and the game switches from grid space view to critter space view. And at that point, you come in, I hope, I think I want you coming in as kind of a lunar lander game. So you've got a high forward velocity, so you see the whole map go flying below you. So, but through the clouds, and then maybe, depending on the star map, maybe there's a destination that you're trying to get to, and so you have to find it, and then once you find it, you have to slow down, and then as you slow down, you start to come in for a landing. And so you have to steer and slow, and maybe for this mode where you're still technically flying your starship drone that you had out in space, and maybe it's kind of ballistic and lunar landery when it's coming in, game number 195. And so, you eventually land or crash. And then once you land, well, if it was a real-time strategy game with 4 players all starting at the same time, maybe you'd be trapped in some sort of a purgatory of orbit until all 4 players were in orbit, and then they would all drop at the same time, and you would try to fly to an area that you thought looked interesting, and you'd see your opponents, and so you'd know whether or not you were. But it wouldn't. Well, the map could certainly just fade from black, and you're already in your assigned spot, and that's what probably most maps would do. Okay, we'll just fractalate a couple more times because I'm a big fan of fractal surfaces. Now I could see I might have to cut to half the resolution here, again, to save frame rate. But maybe not. Maybe the fact that I cut out half of those, maybe that's the half I needed. Yeah, so anyway, so this stuff does have to all boil down to a handful of parameters. I want Lua to call a function, set the current planet stuff, initialize critter space to this, and then when I drive into the atmosphere, it already exists. And while it hasn't been being stepped, maybe, hopefully it has, a starting atmosphere. But when you leave the planet, and I need a return to orbit button, basically. When you leave the planet, for the most part, I don't want to continue doing simulations on the planet. Like, when you return to it, you may find the critters where you left them, or you might find them reinitialized to their starting positions or something. Probably they just won't have been stepped for a while. And so when you encounter them, they'll be where you left them, but suddenly they have to account for the last 5 hours of activity. So they probably all bounce around agitatedly for a few seconds. Okay, well, I like that.